Hello there, students. It's Professor Lorenzo. And in preparation for our section on literature analyzing, we're going to today talk about elements of fiction, but we'll also talk about story structure, and we'll talk a little bit about figurative language. This video, I should probably narrate it for about 14 and a half to 15 minutes. After you're finished with this video, there's also a static lesson in Canvas that you can go and look at it without listening to me narrate it. And I'd advise you to do that. After you're finished checking that out and watching the video, you'll have to complete a quiz. Upon completion of the quiz, that will signal that you have completed your requirements for today, and you'll be marked present in Ring 92 and 101. So let's get moving. So when we talk about story structure, we're basically talking about how are stories put together. And it's been said that all of literature there is essentially only three plots. A stranger comes to town, someone goes on a journey, or a terrible truth is told. Even in our Western tradition, we see these elements in some of our earliest stories. The serpent arrives to tempt Eve. That's a stranger coming to town. God finds out what Eve did. That's a terrible truth which is told. And Adam and Eve are cast out of the garden, which means they go on a journey. Basically, every story every book you read, any movie you see, any television show you watch, they all have either one of these three plots. Either a stranger comes to town, someone goes on a journey, or a terrible truth is told. Everything fits in those three categories, and it's been like that for thousands of years. So if you take a little bit of time and maybe think about the last movie you saw, or maybe the last television show you watched, or YouTube video, and think about how everything transpired, and you'll find out that it fit one of those categories. So every story also has the same type of structure. There are things happen in a specific way. Again, this is something that's been like this for thousands of years. Every story has an introduction. Then there's an inciting incident, which means something happened to take the main character, out of their comfort zone, and now they got to go do something. As they're going about figuring out what's going on, what the problem is and how to fix the problem, that's called the rising action. And once they get to the point where they finally see, aha, this is what's happening, okay, that's called the climax. And the resolution is as they go to solving whatever problem it is, and going back to either normal, which would be how they started in the beginning, or maybe a new normal. Story structure is easy to understand because story structure is basically the way you tell a story to a friend. Suppose you went to a party, but your friend didn't go to the party, and your friend was asking you, hey, what happened? And you say, well, we got to the party. Everything was going pretty good. The music was bumping. Everything was live. Oh, my God, they had great decorations. I mean, this is a really, just figured it was going to be a lot of fun. Then all of a sudden, I heard something loud, some people arguing, and we look over, and two guys were fighting over a girl. So when we heard something loud, that was inciting action. Now in the rising action, we see two guys fighting over a girl. Then other people jumped in the fight and started getting all kinds of crazy. Oh my God, it was the wildest thing you ever seen. People were throwing things. The tables were being turned over. People were screaming and hollering. Nobody got hurt, but it was just all kinds of crazy. Then all of a sudden, and here we come to the climax, the police came, right? Broke up the fight, started locking up people, sending them to jail. Oh my God, I can't believe that happened. Then what happened next? Well, here we come to the resolution. Well, we didn't do anything wrong, so we didn't get locked up. We just kept on partying, and then the party was finally over at 2 o'clock in the morning. We went home and went to bed. That's the resolution. So it's easy to think. It's easy to explain 5-stage story structure because it's the same way you would tell a story to a friend. So, story summary: the beginning introduces main character, setting, and the problem. The middle of a story contains most of the action, problem solving, and the end of the story gives us the solution to the problem and wraps up things for the reader. Now, let's talk about the 5 elements of fiction. So, what we just talked about, what happened at the party, and also the story structure can be summed up as plot. Plot is just simply what happened. You're just telling what happened. So if I asked you to read a short story and I asked you what the plot was, you would tell me in the same way I told you. I just explained what happened at the party. This, got there, this happened, then something went off, then it got really crazy, then the police came, and then, everything got back to normal again, and we went back to partying. So if I asked you to explain the plot and the story, you would just tell it to me in that same exact manner. The 5 elements of plot in literature are plot, setting, theme, character, point of view, and we just talked about plot. Again, you can go back and read this on the static lesson, but it's basically everything I just told you. Okay? Setting is very easy. Setting is just the time, place, and location that a story took place. It could be a specific part of time. Usually, either the author will tell you when it happened on Tuesday, July 15th, 1852. Well, you know what time it was, and the author may say, in Oklahoma. Then you know it was in Oklahoma. In the springtime. I don't know. Whatever. They'll give you indications of what happened, but not always. Sometimes you just have to figure it out from what you're reading. But setting is pretty easy to figure out. Theme. Theme is the hardest of the 5 elements to think about because you have to really think about it. Sometimes you may have to read a story 2 or 3 times to figure out what the theme. In other words, what was the moral of the story? What was the writer trying to what message were they trying to convey? Authors don't often tell you, well, this is what I'm trying to tell you. You have to read the story or watch the movie, figure out what the characters are saying to each other, take a look at basically the events that happened, and then figure out how the story ended up, figure out what the resolution was in order for you to determine what theme is. So if I ask you what theme is, you're going to have to basically think about it and give me your idea of what the author was trying to convey. Characters are pretty easy. The characters of the story can be people, animals, or objects like pencils or robots. Characters could be basically anything or anyone. But there are different types of characters. You've got the main characters, which would be the protagonist. The protagonist is usually the hero of the story. That's the person or the object that the story is most likely about. Then you have the antagonist, which usually is the villain, or that could be the person or the object that is stopping the main character from getting to whatever it is they need or getting them back to normal. This is a little blurry, but types of characters, again, you've got main characters, and which would be probably the antagonist or the protagonist, and then you've got secondary characters, which were people that they may mention their name, but there's not a lot. They don't have a lot of dialogue. They're really not doing a lot. They're just basically in the story to support the antagonist and the protagonist. So if I ask you, to give me the primary characters or the secondary characters, you look at the story or read the story or watch the movie or whatever and tell me which ones were probably the protagonist and the antagonist, and then the other would be the secondary characters, the ones that just get mentioned. Point of view. View is basically who's telling the story. That's all it is. Who is telling the story? There's 3 types of point of view, but the 2 we're going to concern ourselves with are first person and third person. First person point of view is simply means that the person telling the story is using I. It's a character in the story, and they just keep, I did this, I did that, or I did this. Now, they can tell you what the other characters are doing, but the first person doesn't really know what's inside someone's head. They're kind of guessing based upon the other character's actions or whatever. The same way you would do if you were trying to figure out what was going on in a situation. You could say that so-and-so did this and so-and-so did that, but you don't know what was inside so-and-so's head. You have to kind of figure it out from their actions. But first person always uses the term I. Third person, the narrator is on the outside looking in. The third person is not a part of the story. It's just like some voice from outside telling you what's going on with everybody. And typically the third person knows what's going on with each character. Now there are a couple types of third person. There's third person omniscient, and there's third person limited. Third person omniscient, also called the God point of view, because the omniscient knows everything. That's what omni stands for, all. And so omniscient means sees all. but they have no bias or preference. They just tell you what's going on with every single character and what's inside of every character's head. And that's usually the way that a lot of short stories are told. Then you have limited, where the outside narrator, someone who is not in the story, is just giving you what's going on inside of one character's head. They don't know what's going on in the other character's head, but they're just telling you what's going on inside of one character's head, how one character is feeling, or what happens to, or what one character is thinking, or one character's emotions, whatever. Omniscient knows what's going on inside of everyone's head. Limited knows what's going on inside of just one character's head. And then we have to talk about conflict in literature. There's no such thing as a story without conflict. Okay, there has to be something, some kind of battle going on to make a story interesting, all right? We have different types of conflict in literature. You've got man versus nature. That's when the protagonist is fighting against nature. So the antagonist might be an animal or some sort of tree or whatever. And we've got man versus man, where the protagonist is, the battle is against another man. Man versus God, where the protagonist is fighting God. And when we say fight, we don't necessarily mean physical fight. We just mean there's some sort, it could be an emotional battle going on or whatever. There could be some sort of battle, some test of wills, but whatever it is, it's conflict. And we've got man versus society. You've got, that would be something like Dr. Martin Luther King fighting against America in the 50s or whatever. Then we got man versus self, where the battle is inside. Okay, the protagonist is creating his own problem. Then man versus no God, man versus technology, man versus reality, and man versus author. All right. So if I asked you to tell me what the conflict was in a story, you'd tell me, well, the conflict is man versus nature, and it's because of this, and that. Right. So-and-so is battling whatever. Let's talk a little bit about figurative language. Figurative language is basically the expressive language that an author uses to tell a story. Authors don't use just bland, easy terms, because it wouldn't be exciting. They have to use fancy language to make it exciting for someone to read. And the type of figurative language we're going to talk about are similes, metaphors, and personification. All right. Similes are pretty easy. It's just when someone uses a comparison and uses the term like or as in Pyro's eyes were as green as a spring meadow. A few other examples might be, she swims like a fish, or he's as hairy as a gorilla, or Peter laughs like a hyena. If the author is using like or as, okay, then it's a simile. And then we have metaphor. Metaphor is just when the author describes something or compares something with something else without using like or as, such as the sun is a golden ball, or her eyes were saucers, Harry the brightly dressed peacock, or the Olympic runner is the wind. These are all examples of metaphor. And there's some other examples here that you can check out in the static lesson if you like. Personification is simply granting of human traits to objects or animals, such as the M&M peanuts. The guys, they're not really humans, they're M&Ms, okay? But by giving them eyes and hands and feet and giving them voice, we're turning them into people. We're personifying them. There's some other examples of personification right here that you can look at in the static lesson. But the sun peeked happily from behind a cloud. The trees danced back. It's just basically giving objects the same qualifications as human beings. So if you go to the static lesson, there's a short video. It's only about, I think, 2 minutes. Tells you a little bit more about figurative language. There's also a little bit about symbolism. Symbolism is when the author uses an object or reference to add deeper meaning to a story. So it can be subtle or it can be implied, but there's a video here about symbolism, so I'd like you to go and take a look at that in the static lesson. In your quiz, you're going to have to read a story to answer the questions. Just make sure you understand. Sometimes you have to read and reread to get the full explanation, or a full understanding, rather, of the story. There's your assignment for today. That's also in the static lesson. If you go to Canvas, you'll see in week 3, there's going to be the static lesson. I'll be adding this video lesson to this also in a minute, so that'll pop up there. And then you'll also have your quiz. All of this is in English 101 for week 3 Canvas module. Have a good day.